The evening had settled into one of those quiet, slow moments that made the whole world feel a little tired. The sky was fading into a soft blue, and the streetlights were just starting to blink on, one by one. She had finished a long shift, the kind that left her shoulders heavy and her mind tugged in two directions, half ready for rest, half still running on alert, because that was simply how life had trained her. She wasn't wearing anything that would make anyone look twice. A plain jacket, worn jeans, and a simple bag slung over her shoulder. Nothing fancy, nothing bold. To anyone watching, she was just another person stopping by a small store on her way home. And honestly, that was exactly how she liked it. Blending in wasn't just a habit, it was a comfort. The neighborhood wasn't unsafe, but it wasn't the kind where people lingered without reason. That's why she noticed the group of men standing near the store's entrance. They weren't talking loudly or causing trouble, but there was something about the way they kept glancing around, as if waiting for something or someone. She caught a few of their eyes as she walked past, and there was a shift in their expressions. Small, but clear. They seemed to take an interest in her. She pushed open the door to the convenience store and stepped inside. The warm lights and soft hum of the refrigerator units felt familiar, almost comforting. The clerk behind the counter gave a polite nod. She nodded back and headed toward the back where the drinks were kept. She wasn't in a rush. She just wanted something cold for the drive and maybe a small snack. But even as she walked down the aisle, she felt that same prickle at the back of her neck, the one that had saved her more times than she would ever admit. She didn't react right away. She didn't stiffen or look over her shoulder. Instead, she kept her pace natural, scanning the shelves with casual interest. But she was listening. Always listening. A few moments later, the store door opened again. The bell chimed softly. She didn't turn. Instead, she focused on the reflection in the glass of a freezer door. Two of the men from outside had stepped in. They pretended to browse, but their eyes weren't focused on anything in particular. One leaned slightly toward the other, whispering something she couldn't hear. The other glanced in her direction. She exhaled slowly. She had seen this pattern before many times in many places. People looking for someone who seemed distracted, tired, or alone. Someone they thought wouldn't notice the little details. Someone they assumed couldn't do much if something went wrong. She wasn't going to jump to conclusions. Most of the time, people just acted odd without meaning anything by it. But she made a mental note of their positions anyway. One near the front of the store, pretending to be interested in chips. The other hovering near a display of phone chargers. Shifting his weight from one foot to the other, she grabbed a drink from the fridge, then a small pack of crackers, and walked toward the counter. The clerk smiled again, but his eyes darted toward the men as well. She caught that. He wasn't comfortable either. "Quiet evening?" she asked lightly. He shrugged. "Mostly just a bit of a weird vibe today." She didn't ask what he meant. The tone said enough. She paid, thanked him, and stepped outside. The air felt cooler now, carrying that quiet hum of a neighborhood settling in for the night. But the moment she stepped away from the store entrance, she felt movement behind her. Subtle at first. A shuffle of shoes. The kind that didn't belong to someone simply heading to their car. She kept walking. Her steps steady and relaxed, but her senses sharpened. She could hear low voices behind her, and though their words weren't clear, their tone was unmistakable, focused, directed. Not random. Her car was a short distance away, parked under a streetlight. She reached into her bag for her keys, not fumbling or rushing. Everything in her body language remained calm. She wasn't interested in drawing attention to herself. She simply wanted to understand what was happening. She heard footsteps, Susette's fall into rhythm behind her. Not close enough to look threatening to anyone passing by, but close enough that she knew. They had matched her pace on purpose. She took a slow breath and quietly checked her surroundings. There were no other pedestrians nearby. The store door was closed. The group outside had shifted slightly, their attention turned more directly toward her. They weren't acting like people waiting for a friend or killing time. They were watching her as she reached her car. She placed her drink and snack on the roof, pretending to adjust her bag's strap. She didn't turn around yet, but she could sense them getting closer. One of the men took a few more steps, as if trying to appear casual. Another remained a few yards behind, glancing around before looking back at her. She didn't feel fear. She felt awareness, sharp, measured, clear. Her heartbeat didn't race. Her hands didn't shake. She had learned long ago that panic never helped anyone. She finally turned to unlock her car door, and that's when she saw the small reflection in the window. A brief moment where the glass caught the shape of someone approaching just a little too confidently. She straightened up slowly and turned around. The man closest to her offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hey there," he said, trying to keep his tone light. She didn't return the smile. "Evening." "You dropped something," he said, though she hadn't dropped anything at all. It was an old tactic. Get someone to look away, crouch down, or lean over. She didn't play along. "No, I didn't." His smile faltered for half a second. The other man paused a few steps behind him, waiting. She held her bag strap with one hand and her keys with the other. Her posture remained calm, almost relaxed, but she kept her eyes on both of them. "You need something?" she asked, her tone as neutral as a sheet of blank paper. He hesitated, then shook his head with a forced laugh. "Just being friendly." Behind him, the second man looked toward the store again. As if checking whether the clerk had come out or anyone else was watching, she followed his glance. And that's when she noticed something else, a third person from the earlier group lingering near the corner of the building. Pretending to scroll through his phone, but stealing quick looks in her direction, a subtle tightening in her chest, not fear. Just confirmation. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't coincidence. They had watched her go in, watched her come out. And now they were trying to engage her for reasons that had nothing to do with friendliness. Still, she didn't overreact. She didn't want things escalating unnecessarily. Most problems ended before they began if the right choices were made early enough. She reached casually for her drink on the roof of her car. "Well, I've got a long drive." "You two take care." She expected them to step back. Most people, when they realized someone wasn't falling into their little script, backed off. But these two didn't move. Instead, they exchanged a quick glance, one of those tiny, telling looks people shared. When they were deciding whether to push a situation further, the one closest to her shifted his stance just a bit, angling himself so she would have to walk past him to get into her car. Her eyes stayed on him. Her expression didn't change. Her instincts continued whispering, steady and sensible. Keep calm. Keep listening. Keep everything slow. She had faced far more dangerous situations than this, but that didn't mean she could ignore this moment. Every situation deserved the same care, the same awareness, the same respect for the unknown. The man cleared his throat, searching for another line. "Where are you headed?" She tapped her keys gently against her palm. "Home." "Nice. Need help with anything?" She raised a brow. No, the simplicity of her answers seemed to annoy him, even though she said it without attitude or sharpness. It was the kind of answer that didn't leave room for the game he was trying to play. The second man stepped a little closer, his movements small but deliberate. The third was still keeping watch by the corner. She felt the weight of their intentions, as clearly as if they had spoken them aloud. They thought she was alone. They thought she was tired. They thought she wouldn't know how to react. She opened her car door slowly, still keeping her eyes on them. The man closest to her didn't step back. Instead, he asked, "You sure you're okay?" She met his eyes, her voice steady. "Yes." Something shifted in her tone, not louder, not sharper, but firmer. Enough to let them know she wasn't unsure, wasn't nervous, wasn't someone they could mislead. For the first time, the closest man's expression flickered. He hadn't expected that. She wasn't rude. She wasn't confrontational. She was simply certain. And sometimes certainty was all it took to make someone hesitate. She didn't get inside the car yet. She paused, studying them just as they studied her. Her instincts continued gathering information, their posture, their breathing, the tension in their shoulders, the glances they kept trading. She knew how to see people, really see them, and everything she saw told her one thing. They had picked her because they thought she was easy. They had no idea. Who they were dealing with, not yet, not at all. The air around her felt a little heavier now, as if the night itself was paying attention. She stood by her car door, her hand resting lightly on the frame. While the man in front of her tried to keep his easy smile in place, it was clear he wasn't expecting her to hold her ground the way she did. He had set up a scene in his mind, a version of events where she played the nervous stranger and he played the confident one in control. Now that she wasn't following his script, he seemed unsure what to do next. She didn't move. She didn't rush. She simply watched him, her calmness creating a kind of quiet pressure that he hadn't prepared for. The second man shifted uneasily a few feet behind him, and even from the corner of her eye. She could tell he was rethinking things, but the night wasn't done testing her. From the corner of the building, the third man pushed away from the wall and started walking toward them. He tried to look casual, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, a slight lift of his chin, the false confidence in his steps. He walked like someone who wanted to be in charge, but wasn't used to being questioned. She stayed exactly where she was. The first man cleared his throat and spoke again, as if trying to regain control of the moment. "You look tired. Long day?" he asked. His words were meant to sound friendly, but the tone behind them told a different story. A story of someone probing, testing boundaries. She nodded once. "Long day, yes, but I'm fine." It was a pause. Not long, but long enough to change something in the air. The man's smile faded another notch. The second man looked at the ground briefly, then at her, then back at the man in front. And the third one, now closing the distance, watched her with a kind of quiet calculation. She noticed every detail without making it obvious. Every step, every glance, every slight shift in posture. Some people learn these things only through experience. She learned them because her life had demanded it. The first man finally stepped back a little, as if giving her space. But she could tell it wasn't a gesture of politeness. It was a gesture of someone trying to find a new angle. "We're just checking if you needed help," he said, forcing a light laugh. The third man arrived then, placing himself just slightly to the side where he could see both her and his friends. "Everything okay here?" he asked, pretending he had just noticed the situation. She met his eyes. "Everything's fine." Her voice was still steady, still calm. And that calmness seemed to unsettle him more than anything else. He studied her for a long second. "Looks like you're out here alone," he said casually. She answered without hesitation. "People run errands alone every day," he smiled, but it didn't feel friendly. "True, but sometimes it's safer with company." The way he said it wasn't a suggestion. It was a test. She took a slow breath, not out of fear, but out of patience. "Thank you for the concern," she said, "but I'm heading home." She moved her hands slightly, preparing to step into her car. The first man immediately took a half step closer, not aggressively, but just enough to make it clear he didn't want her to leave yet. She noticed. All three of them noticed that she noticed. The moment rested on a thin edge now, a delicate balance between their expectations and her refusal to be pulled into them. "Relax," the third man said softly, raising both hands, as if he wanted to appear harmless. "Nobody's trying to bother you." But the fact that he had to say it told her everything. She let a small pause stretch between them before answering. "Then let me go home." It was simple. Too simple for them to argue with. Yet none of them stepped aside. The third man took a breath and tried again. "Where do you live?" "Not far from here, right?" That was the moment she knew for certain they weren't simply curious or confused. They were looking for an opportunity, waiting for a weakness, and she wasn't about to give them one. She straightened her back just slightly. Barely enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for them to see something shift in her energy. Confidence revealed itself in quiet ways, and hers spoke louder than any threat. "I'm going home," she repeated, "and I don't need anything from you." The second man swallowed, casting a quick glance at the third. The first man rubbed the back of his neck, unsure what direction things were heading anymore. Their plan, whatever it had been, was slowly unraveling in their hands. The third man stepped a little closer, lowering his voice. "You seem tense. Relax, we're just talking." She shook her head gently. "Talking isn't the problem. Blocking my way is..." His jaw tightened. Just a small movement, but she saw it. He wasn't used to people calling out his intentions. He wasn't used to someone seeing straight through the surface. She maintained her composure. Her breathing remained steady. Her gaze never wavered. "Move," she said softly. The first man blinked. "What did you say?" "Move," she repeated, her tone still calm, still even. But with a firmness that didn't require volume, the second man shifted back a step. Almost automatically, as if his body understood something his mind hadn't processed yet. But the third man didn't budge. He tilted his head slowly. "You talk like someone who isn't scared." "Not," she said. The wind nudged a piece of loose paper across the pavement. The streetlight flickered once overhead. For a moment, none of them spoke. Her lack of fear bothered him more than any threat could have. Fear was predictable. Fear made people easy to steer, but calm. Calm made people dangerous in ways he couldn't guess. She took a small step forward, not aggressive, just purposeful. She made eye contact with him, not challenging him, but refusing to look away. "I'm going home now," she said again. Finally, he stepped aside, but he didn't look defeated. He looked curious, as she opened her car door fully and placed her bag on the passenger seat. She heard the first man whisper, "Just let her go. We'll find someone else." Someone else. Her hand froze for a moment, resting on the door. Those words carried weight. Heavy, troubling weight. She felt something twist quietly in her chest, not fear, not anger, but something like disappointment. People like them didn't stop because they were told to stop. They stopped because they thought they had picked the wrong moment, the wrong person. But what about the next moment? The next person? She kept her face calm as she looked into the mirror installed on the side of her car. Their reflection stood behind her, still talking quietly, still glancing around as if scanning for others. She could have driven away. She could have let the night swallow the situation and pretend. None of it mattered. But it did matter. She wasn't just someone running errands. She wasn't just a tired person heading home. She wasn't someone who accidentally walked into danger. Her life had been built around seeing danger before it arrived, preventing things before they happened, protecting people who didn't know they needed protection. She couldn't just drive away. Not yet. She reached into her bag, not suddenly, not dramatically, and pulled out her phone. She didn't call anyone yet. She didn't need to. She simply let the phone rest in her palm where the men could see it. The first man noticed and nudged the second. "She's calling someone." "She doesn't need to call anyone," the third man said sharply. For the first time sounding unsettled, she didn't answer. She didn't need to. Instead, she leaned calmly against her car door. Looking at the three men with that same steady, grounded expression, the third man took a step forward again. "Hey, we didn't do anything." "Not yet," she replied quietly. The words seemed to hit him harder than he expected. They weren't spoken in anger or threat. They were spoken like someone who had seen the truth of a situation long before anyone else could. He opened his mouth to answer. But then something in her expression made him pause. It wasn't her stance. It wasn't her tone. It was something deeper. Something he couldn't name. A moment later, he clicked his tongue and turned away. "Forget it. Let's go." The second man followed immediately. The first hesitated for a few seconds, then finally walked after them. They didn't run. They didn't argue. They simply walked away, disappearing gradually into the dim light of the street, as if melting back into the shadows. But their steps were faster than before, their shoulders a little tighter. She stayed still, watching them until they were far enough not to hear anything she said. Only then did she whisper softly to herself, "That could have been worse. Much worse." She closed her car door slowly, but she didn't start the engine yet. Her fingertips tapped lightly on the steering wheel as she considered everything she had just seen. Every detail she had gathered. She knew their faces, their voices, their patterns of movement, their behavior, and she knew, without a trace of doubt, that this wasn't the first time. If they had tried this, her instincts wouldn't let it go. She wasn't someone who walked away from problems. She was someone trained to solve them. And tonight, the problem had walked right up to her. She took a slow breath, then reached for her phone. The night wasn't over yet. The night felt different now. Not louder, not more dangerous, just different. As she sat in her car with the engine still silent, she could sense the shift inside herself. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. The kind that settled slowly, like dust after something heavy had been dropped. Her fingers rested loosely on the steering wheel, but her mind was already replaying every detail of the last few minutes. The way the men had watched her. The way they moved. The way they tried to block her without making it obvious. And then the words, "We'll find someone else." Someone else. That was what bothered her most. They weren't just bored or rude. They weren't harmless strangers lingering outside a store. They were looking for opportunity. For someone tired, someone distracted, someone unaware. She couldn't ignore that. Not when she knew how often people like them succeeded. Simply because no one intervened, she lifted her phone and scrolled to a familiar contact. Her thumb hovered, but she didn't press call yet. She didn't want to escalate anything before she understood the full picture. She wasn't planning to accuse anyone or create panic. She just needed to be sure. The store lights glowed behind her. The clerk inside was sweeping the floor, his movements slow, maybe tired, maybe uneasy. She saw him glance toward the window twice. Maybe he had noticed more than he let on earlier. She opened her car door quietly and stepped out again. She didn't want to alarm anyone, but she had to check something. She approached the store, keeping her posture relaxed, almost casual. When she stepped inside, the clerk looked up in surprise. "Forgot something?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "No, I just had a quick question." He stopped sweeping. His eyes held a kind of worry, as if he had been holding on to a thought he didn't want to say out loud. "Those guys outside," she said softly, "do they come here often?" The clerk hesitated, his lips pressing into a thin line. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Not every day. But enough. Do they bother customers?" Another pause. He didn't want to complain, but he didn't want to lie either. A few people mentioned they felt uncomfortable. Nothing big, but you can tell when someone's trying something. He lowered his voice even more. They watch people, especially women who come alone. Her chest tightened, not with fear, but with confirmation. Her instincts had been right. She knew it wasn't just her imagination. "Has anything happened before?" she asked. The clerk looked toward the windows again, then shook his head slowly. "Not inside the store, but outside. I don't know. People don't always report things." She nodded. That was true. Many people brushed things off, thinking it wasn't worth mentioning. Some didn't want trouble. Others didn't want to look dramatic. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "I'm fine," she said with a small smile. "Thank you for asking." He opened his mouth as if to say more, but she shook her head gently to show she didn't want to make him nervous. She paid for a bottle of water she didn't really need and stepped back outside. The parking lot looked empty now. The three men were gone. The street lights hummed softly, casting long stretches of quiet light across the asphalt. She scanned the area carefully, her eyes following the dark edges of the street, the corners of the buildings, the gaps between parked cars. No sign of them. She exhaled slowly. Not in relief, just an acknowledgement that things had shifted again. She got back into her car and closed the door. This time, she started the engine, letting it warm up as she reviewed her options. She wasn't going to go after them. She wasn't going to follow them or confront them again. That wasn't her job, not like this. Not alone. Not without evidence. But she couldn't just drop it. Either she finally pressed the call button. The line rang once. Twice. Then a calm voice answered, "Where are you?" She didn't waste time. Near the Oak Ridge convenience store? Something's off here. Three men watching customers. They approached me when I walked out. The voice on the other end didn't sound surprised, just attentive. "Are you safe now?" "Yes. They left the area a few minutes ago. I'm still in the parking lot. Do you have visuals?" "No. They were careful. But I got a good look at them."
8.
She paused. "And they've done this before." The clerk confirmed it. There was a quiet sigh on the other end. Not frustration, more like concern mixed with acceptance. You want us to send someone? She thought for a moment. There was nothing happening at this exact moment. No one was in danger at this exact second. Calling in fully marked units for 3 men who had merely behaved suspiciously would draw unnecessary attention. Not yet, she said. Just keep a unit nearby for the next hour, in case they come back. Understood. Anything else you need? She glanced around the lot again, her eyes sharp and searching. Not right now. I'll head home soon. Call if anything changes. I will. She ended the call, but didn't drive away just yet. She watched the empty sidewalk, the quiet storefronts, the distant passing cars. Everything looked calm now. No signs of danger, no movement in the shadows, but danger never announced itself with a sign. She placed her hands gently on the steering wheel. She could leave now. She could go home, lock her doors, make something warm to drink, and let the night fade away. But something felt unfinished. Her instincts nudged her. Again quiet but firm, she reached for her phone once more and opened the front camera for a moment, checking her reflection. Not out of vanity, but to read her own face. She had learned long ago that her expression told her things she couldn't always put into words. Calm, steady, focused. She nodded once, then pulled out of the parking lot, but she didn't take the usual route home. She circled the block instead, scanning the nearby streets. Not searching for the men, she wasn't on a chase. She just wanted to understand the area better. Suspicious behavior rarely happened in isolation. People like them often returned to familiar spots, often lingered in predictable patterns. After a slow pass, she noticed something, a small alleyway beside an old laundromat. A place with no cameras, dim lighting, and barely any foot traffic. A place where someone could wait unseen. She slowed her car, not stopping completely, just moving slow enough to observe without drawing attention. The alley was empty now. The tire marks and footprints told a quiet story. Someone had been there recently. She kept driving. The next block had a small bus stop with a damaged bench. The kind of place where people sat only when they had no other choice. As she passed it, she noticed something on the ground, a plastic cup crushed in a way that didn't look like an accident. Someone had stepped on it deliberately. Someone pacing, maybe? She kept driving. 3 blocks over, she saw a fast food place with its lights still on. A family sat inside, sharing fries and laughing. 2 teens waited near the door for milkshakes. Everything looked normal, but normal didn't erase what she had seen earlier. She circled back toward the store one more time. The clerk had turned the sign to closed but was still inside counting money from the register. He didn't notice her slow pass. She didn't need him to. She parked across the street for a moment, her engine running softly. She watched the area with quiet focus. Then, finally, she saw movement. A figure walking back toward the store from the far end of the street. Not rushed, not urgent, just walking, confidently. Her heartbeat didn't change. She leaned slightly forward, making sure she wasn't misreading the distance. Another figure appeared behind the first, then a third. The same 3 men. They had come back. She didn't reach for her phone immediately. She wanted to understand what they were doing. Were they looking for someone else? Were they planning something? Or were they simply lingering again? They walked to their original spot near the store entrance. They didn't talk much this time. They just looked around, scanning the street the same way she had, but for entirely different reasons. She watched them without blinking. Now she understood something important. They weren't just hoping to encounter someone by chance. They were waiting for another person to walk in alone, waiting for another moment like the one they had tried with her. She exhaled slowly and finally picked up her phone. This time, she didn't hesitate. "They're back," she said the moment the call was answered. "How many?" the voice asked immediately. 3. Same ones. Same behavior. Same location. "Stay in your car. Units are on the way." She nodded to herself. "I'm watching from across the street. They haven't noticed me. Good, stay put. Don't approach." She smiled faintly at the reminder. "I won't." She lowered her phone, keeping her eyes on them. Minutes passed, slow and careful. She could feel her breath steadying, her body relaxing, even though her mind stayed sharp soon. She heard the distant sound of a vehicle, not loud, not flashing lights. Just a soft engine approaching, an unmarked car. It pulled into the lot quietly. The three men didn't notice right away. They were distracted, looking up the street. Then the driver stepped out. A tall figure, wearing plain clothes. Casual, calm, professional. She watched as the men's posture straightened slightly, their attention finally shifting toward the car. The tall figure took a slow step forward, then another. Not threatening, not dramatic, just steady. The moment felt still, like everything in the night had paused to see what would happen next. She didn't move. She didn't blink. Everything was unfolding exactly the way she knew it. Everything was about to change, and the men had no idea yet. The street looked different the next morning, almost like the city itself was trying to warn him to be careful. He stepped outside with a calm face, but inside he felt a weight sitting on his chest. What happened the night before wasn't something he could ignore. He had warned them. He had tried to settle things without turning it into a bigger problem. But trouble had a way of chasing people who were trying to stay quiet. He walked down the steps and scanned the area without making it look obvious. An older man sweeping the sidewalk nodded to him, and he nodded back. A few cars drove past. Nothing strange. But sometimes danger didn't show up in a loud way. It slipped around in silence. Waiting, he took a slow breath and started walking toward his car. He could feel that familiar alertness waking up in him, the same one that had helped him for years in situations far more dangerous than a few local troublemakers. But even small problems, when handled carelessly, could grow into something ugly. He unlocked his car and sat inside for a moment. He rested his hands on the steering wheel and let himself think without rushing. He had to decide how far he was willing to let this go. If the people from last night were smart, they would drop the whole thing. But the look in their eyes made him doubt they had that kind of sense. He started the engine and drove out. His plan for the day was simple. Check on the usual places. Talk to the few people who had reached out to him, and try to keep everything calm. But he didn't make it far before noticing a small car following him. Not very close. Not very obvious. But he had spent too much of his life watching mirrors to miss it. He didn't react. He kept driving normally, making his usual turns. The car stayed behind, slow and patient. Whoever they weren't amateurs. He turned into a public street with stores and morning crowds. The car behind him didn't follow this time. Instead, it continued straight. He kept watching until it was gone, blending into the flow of traffic. So they were checking on him, maybe trying to see where he went or who he met. That alone told him that this wasn't going away on its own. He parked near a small cafe and went inside. The place was warm, filled with people going to work or meeting someone before starting their day. He ordered tea and sat at a table near the window, where he could see outside without seeming like he was watching. He knew one thing for sure. Once people start following you, it means they want more than trouble. It means they want information. And information was the one thing he couldn't let them have. His phone vibrated. It was a message from someone he trusted deeply, someone who understood the work he used to do, the care he needed to take even after stepping away from certain responsibilities. Be careful today. Something feels off. He read it twice. He looked out the window again. Nothing unusual. Just a bus pulling into the stop and people walking by. But messages like that didn't come without reason. He finished his drink and stepped out. The air felt a little colder, as if the day had suddenly turned serious. He walked a few blocks and stopped near a crossing. That was when he noticed a tall man leaning by a wall across the street. The man wasn't looking at him directly, but he kept adjusting something in his jacket as if checking. Whether something was still there, he didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe the man was just waiting for someone. But when he crossed the street, the man straightened up when he walked left. The man started walking left when he slowed down slightly. The man slowed down too. He sighed softly. They really weren't going to let this go. He kept walking until He reached an area with more people. The man followed at a steady pace, always keeping just enough distance to pretend it wasn't intentional then. The man made a mistake. He whispered something into a small device hidden under his jacket. That one small move told him everything there was more than one. He felt the shift in the air behind him. A shadow moving too quickly. A step that came too close. Someone approaching from the corner. He didn't run. He didn't panic. That wasn't his way. Instead, he walked right into a busy spot near a small open market. The sudden crowd forced the people following him to slow down. They couldn't get close without drawing attention. He took advantage of that moment. He ducked behind a stall, walked another direction, and merged into the moving crowd. Years of practice made him almost invisible when he needed to be. He slipped out of the market through a different exit and circled around 2 blocks. He made sure he wasn't being followed before stopping near a quiet bookstore. He leaned against the wall and took a deep breath. If this continued, he would have to act soon. Not with force, there were rules he always respected, but with strategy, the kind that didn't break laws, but made sure the wrong people learned to back off. He pulled out his phone again and sent a short message. "I think they've started moving. Might need support later." He didn't need to explain. The person on the other end would understand. He looked around once more and started walking again. Calmer now, but more alert than before, as he moved through the streets. He thought about how strange life could be. He had spent years helping people, solving problems quietly, stepping into danger when others couldn't. But now he was trying to live a simpler life, stay out of trouble. And trouble had found him anyway. He finally reached a small community center where he sometimes volunteered. Inside, familiar faces greeted him, people who trusted him, people who relied on him. Their presence eased the tension in his shoulders. For a while, he helped with small tasks, listened to someone's worries, and tried to bring calm into a place where life had already been hard for many. But even in the middle of that, his mind remained alert. He kept replaying the morning in his head, searching for meaning. Someone had sent people to watch him. Someone knew what he was capable of. Someone wanted something by the time he left the center. The sun was beginning to set. The sky was painted in orange and pink, but the beauty of it couldn't shake the sense of caution inside him. He walked home with quiet steps. The streets were calmer now, the morning rush gone. Halfway home, he stopped. A black van was parked on the corner, the engine running, windows tinted. He didn't move. He didn't show fear. He simply observed, counting, noticing, thinking. 3 shadows inside. 1 in the front. 2 in the back. They were waiting. Not for him specifically, but for a moment. When they thought he was alone, he continued walking as if he had seen nothing. The van didn't move. He reached home, locked the door, and sat down again, just like he had earlier that morning. Hands resting on the table. This time he wasn't wondering whether trouble would return. He knew it would. He took out his phone and typed a message slowly. "If they push again, I'll have to show who they're dealing with." He paused before sending it. He didn't want to escalate things. There was a line people shouldn't cross. He hit send. Whatever was coming next wouldn't be simple, but he was ready. He had spent years protecting others, working in places where most people would never dare to go. He knew how to move, how to handle pressure, how to stay calm when things got complicated, and if these people thought he was just another easy target, they were about to find out how wrong they were. The night grew quiet around him, but inside he felt the tension rising like a storm forming in the distance. Tomorrow would bring answers, and possibly more danger, but he wasn't afraid. He was prepared, even if they didn't know it yet. Wasn't someone they should have chosen to follow. He wasn't just another man on the street, he was federal, and the moment they pushed too far, they would understand exactly what that meant. The night felt heavy, the kind of heavy that made the air still and the silence too sharp. He sat in his living room with only a small lamp glowing beside him. Outside, the street was quiet, almost pretending nothing unusual had happened over the last 2 days. But he knew better. Calm streets could hide storms. He leaned back in his chair and let the silence settle. He wasn't someone who rushed into action. He always believed that careful thinking solved more problems than force ever could. But tonight he could feel something shifting, as if everything was slowly moving toward a point where he would have no choice but to step in. He stood up and walked to the window. From behind the curtains, he watched the street. A single car drove past, its headlights casting long shadows across the houses. Nothing suspicious. Nothing alarming. But he stayed there for a while, checking every corner with steady eyes. He wasn't scared. But he wasn't careless either. He turned away from the window and picked up his phone. There were no new messages. No updates. No warnings. Just silence. And sometimes silence meant that the real noise was still on its way. He set the phone down and walked to the kitchen. He filled a glass of water and took a slow sip. His reflection in the window above the sink looked calm, but he could see the tension in the lines of his face. The way his shoulders tightened without him realizing it. He had worked hard to live a life away from stress, away from danger. But danger had walked right back into his world, uninvited. And it wasn't leaving. As he placed the glass down, a soft sound came from outside. Not loud, not urgent. Just enough to let him know someone was there. He didn't rush. He walked to the front door and listened. The sound repeated a quiet step on the gravel. Maybe 2 steps. Someone was in front of his house. He took a slow breath, not out of fear, but preparation. He opened the door gently and stepped outside. The night breeze touched his face, cool and steady. At the edge of the street, a man stood waiting, not hiding, not moving, just standing there as if he wanted to be seen. He wore a plain jacket and kept his hands visible. That alone told him something important. This wasn't an ambush. This was a message. He walked toward the man slowly, staying aware of everything around him. The man didn't flinch or step back. He waited until they were close enough to speak without raising their voices. "I'm here to talk," the man said quietly. His voice wasn't threatening. It wasn't confident either. It was careful. "Then talk," he replied. The man swallowed, choosing his words. "There are people who want information about you. They paid a group to follow you. They want to know what you do, where you go, who you meet." He didn't respond. He let the man continue. "Didn't agree with the way things were going," the man said. "They're going too far. I thought you should know." He studied the man's face. There was fear there, but also sincerity. "Why tell me?" "Because the people you dealt with the other night, they won't stop. And the ones behind them won't stop either. They think you're someone they can pressure." He almost smiled. "Not out of amusement, but disbelief. They think I'm someone they can pressure." The man nodded nervously. "They don't know who you are." "Not fully. If they did, they wouldn't be doing any of this." The moonlight made the street look almost peaceful, a strange contrast to the tension in the air. "What do they want?" he asked. The man hesitated. "They think you have access to information. They think you're still active." He kept his expression calm. "And do they know what happens if they push too far?" The man shook his head. "No, they don't understand what you're capable of." He looked down the empty street, thinking. People who chased power rarely understood the consequences. And people who thought they could control others often chose the wrong targets. "You should go home," he told the man. "Stay away from them. They're heading into a place they don't understand." The man nodded quickly. "I will. I just thought. You should know before something happens." He appreciated the warning. Not many people would risk themselves to deliver a message like that. "Thank you," he said. "Be careful." The man stepped back, relief showing in his eyes. "I will." He watched as the man walked away, disappearing around the corner. For a moment, the street returned to silence, but inside, he knew things were about to shift. He went back inside his house and closed the door. The warning had confirmed something he already suspected. Someone bigger was behind all of this. He didn't rush. He walked to the table again, sat down, placed his hands together. If they wanted to test him, they would get their answer. He picked up his phone again and sent a short message. They're making their move. I may need you soon. The reply came only seconds later. Say the word. He put the phone down. The weight in his chest lifted slightly. He wasn't alone, and he never had been. There were people ready to step in not to cause trouble, but to protect him if things went too far. Hours passed. He stayed awake, watching the quiet night outside, waiting for the moment everything would come together. It came just after dawn. A loud knock sounded at his door. Firm but controlled, he opened it carefully. 2 men stood there. Not the same ones from before. These ones looked more organized, more serious. They wore simple clothes, but carried themselves with purpose. We're here to talk, the one in front said politely. He studied them. Then talk. We have questions, the man said. About your background? About what you know? And who sent you? He asked. The men exchanged a look but said nothing. He shook his head. If you want answers, you're asking the wrong person. The man stepped forward slightly, lowering his voice. This can stay simple. Just tell us what you used to do. He kept his expression calm. What I used to do is not your concern. The man tried again. There are people who believe you're involved in something. If you cooperate, we can avoid problems. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just held their gaze. The second man sighed. Look, we don't want conflict. Just information. Stepped outside and closed the door behind him. You're not getting any information. Not today. Not ever. Turn around and leave before you make a mistake you can't fix. The first man stiffened slightly. Are you threatening us? No, he replied softly. I'm warning you. There's a difference. The men glanced at each other again, suddenly unsure. He continued, You followed me? You sent people to my house. You tried to see who I talked to. That stops now. Because if it doesn't, the next people who show up won't be the ones you sent. The man swallowed hard. Who are you? He answered with the same quiet confidence he had carried for years. Someone you shouldn't be following. The men stepped back. The message had been received. Even without a badge, even without raising his voice. They understood. Leave, he said calmly. They left. He watched until they disappeared down the street. Then he finally allowed himself a long breath. He went back inside, sat down again, and let the morning light fill the room. The storm had started, but it was already fading. They had come looking for answers instead. They found the truth. He wasn't an easy target. He wasn't someone they could push. He wasn't someone they could corner. He was federal, and they finally understood what that meant. The day felt lighter. Not because the danger was gone, but because the message had been delivered clearly. Whatever happened next, he knew he could handle it. He stood up, straightened his jacket, and stepped outside into the new day, ready for whatever might come, calm as ever, steady as always.